The judge seemed frustrated without being able to do more and, in fact, invoked the possibility of jail time. He threatened incarceratory punishment as part of his statement. Nobody believes that that could happen, do they?
I don't think so, although if Donald Trump continues to violate the terms of the gag order, it's foreseeable that the judge could lose his patience and do something like that, step him back, as they say, for an hour or two behind the courtroom in the little holding cell that they have there. I don't expect that. And actually, we saw today Trump did tweet something, or social media portrays the judge as prejudiced and blah, 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 blah. But he steered clear of anything that the gag order prohibited. So maybe he will stay within the confines of it. And, you know, hopefully he does for his sake.
Well, Michael, it kind of begs the question of, even if from now on he does stay within the confines of the gag order, he already has made it known that he thinks Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen are sleazebags and a variety of other things. His opinions are out there. People who follow and support Donald Trump already know them. That can't be reversed. I just wonder how much further violations would even matter when all of that already has happened.
I don't think it would matter at all, which is sort of the irony of the gag order. And in fact, curiously, in today's gag order hearing, the judge said, look, to Trump, if Cohen and Daniels come after you in social media, you can reply in kind. So he recognizes, he said that Cohen is using the gag order as a sword, and he's not going to allow Cohen to use it and deny Trump the right to reply. So you've got a lot of sort of adolescent behavior here among Trump, Daniels, and Cohen. You know, behoove each of them to just sort of be quiet and let the day in court be their, you know, sort of megaphone. But I don't think any of them have the resistance to do that.
Yeah, we heard from the former president as he was leaving the courthouse earlier. This has become a daily event. Michael, let's listen to what he said.
Okay, thank you very much. This gag order is not only unique, it's totally unconstitutional. I'm the Republican candidate for President of the United States. I received this honor in record time. Nobody's ever gone faster. It's never happened. Nobody's ever got the numbers that we got. And I'm sitting in a courthouse all day long listening to this stuff.
He continues to frame this as Joe Biden weaponizing the Justice Department. Michael Zeldin, you worked for the Justice Department. Can you delineate for us?
Yeah, there's something called the federal system and the state system. Joe Biden is in charge of the federal system. And in New York, Alvin Bragg is the chief law enforcement officer for the state system. And they can coordinate. There are state federal prosecutions that I participated in and many people participated in. But there's no evidence here of a Biden-led Justice Department prosecution. If the Justice Department wanted to prosecute, they would have done so through the Southern District of New York. They had the authority to prosecute these exact same charges. They declined. So in some sense, the Biden Justice Department has declined to proceed, and the state Justice Department, through Alvin Bragg, has decided to proceed separately.
Okay, so fact checked from Michael Zeldin, understood. There also, in terms of what we've been hearing consistently from Donald Trump, is this idea that this gag order prevents him from responding to ways in which he has been attacked. We were speaking with another attorney, Robert McWhorter, on the early edition of Balance of Power today, who essentially was describing that if Donald Trump wants the ability to speak freely, he can do so from the witness stand. Is testifying in his own defense really his safe, legal, non-violating of any court order opportunity to air all of his grievances with these witnesses?
Well, testifying certainly would not violate the gag order unless he says something crazy on the witness stand. Whether it's safe is a whole other question. I don't think from a legal jeopardy standpoint, it would be smart to put Donald Trump on the witness stand, because I don't think that he would make a very good witness. I would think he would make Michael Cohen look like an ideal witness. But as the evidence comes in, if Trump's lawyer believes that they need a Hail Mary pass and Trump is that, they may put him on the witness stand. But I don't expect to see him. I just think he's too I guess, unreliable.
As we spend time with Michael Zeldin, the former federal prosecutor, I wonder what you're looking for at this point, Michael. We're going to have another gag order hearing for further alleged violations, other complaints on Thursday. But what testimony are you compelled by right now? We're waiting for Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, the star witnesses. Hope Hicks could be a closer from what we're hearing. But we've got 6 weeks to fill. What will be important?
Well, we'll see whether this lasts 6 weeks. But I was interested in what happened in the courtroom today with Davidson, the lawyer for Stormy Daniels, because he didn't really give direct testimony that Donald Cohen was going to be the payor of this $130,000 hush money payment. He said, I assumed it. That's been the ordinary course. The defense objected to speculation, and the judge sustained that objection, that he couldn't speculate. So I think, the defense here is not likely shooting for an absolute not guilty verdict, but rather a hung jury, a one-person, two-person not guilty and the rest guilty, and therefore they have to retry it. And I think Davidson really didn't do the job that the prosecutors hoped he would do by saying, I knew Donald Trump was going to pay this money. In fact, he said Trump was just dragging his feet, and then Michael Cohen jumps in. Well, if you're a defense attorney, you can argue, well, Donald Trump had second thoughts about paying this, and that undermines the notion that there was an imperative for the election. And Cohen, wanting to be, Superman and savior and gets the pat on the head, decides to jump in on his own. So I think there's a lot in today's testimony that the defense will probably be happy about when it comes to their closing argument about reasonable doubt.
That's a really interesting reading, considering we also did hear Davidson kind of suggest it wasn't clear to him whether or not Cohen had the authority to make the payment without Donald Trump's say-so, which kind of brings it back to this question around whether this actually was a Class E felony, that it was falsifying business records with the intent to violate election law to influence the outcome of the 2016 election. Is what really has to be proven here intent, that all of this really was about politics? Is that essentially what you're saying the difficulty might be for prosecutors when hearing testimony like we heard today?
Well, their theory of prosecution seems to be that there was a payment made to Stormy Daniels because it was necessary to suppress in order to prevent the story from interfering with his electoral aspirations. Then the second part is they covered that up on the business records and falsified those business records. So the primary charge is falsification of business records with the intent to, they say, interfere with the election. But it also could be intent to interfere with tax charges, because that is alleged here too. But they've hung their hat so far mostly on election interference. And all I'm saying is, so far as of today, I don't think they've clearly established that Trump was the payor and knew he was going to make the payment. I think there are inferences that can be drawn, but I think they need to tighten up their testimony.